Tonight, a broadcast exclusive. Sky News joins Keir Starmer on his first trip to Ukraine as Prime Minister. He talks to us about the war with Russia and President Trump, and he gives a very clear signal that British troops could be part of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine if there's a peace deal.
We have always been one of the leading countries in relation to the defence of Ukraine, and so you can read into that that we will be playing our full part. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. Also tonight, the Home Secretary announces new government-backed local inquiries into grooming gangs, claiming they often lead to better outcomes for victims. Plus, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, admits her party made a mistake by leaving the EU without having a plan. And the MP Mike Amesbury's been kicked out of the Labour Party after admitting punching a man in the street. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. The Prime Minister has made his first trip to Ukraine since entering Downing Street at a crucial time for the conflict there. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has been travelling with him and spoke to him about whether UK troops could be deployed as part of a peacekeeping force and the impact of Donald Trump on the Ukraine war, even before he re-entered the White House. We'll bring you that interview in a moment. But before sitting down with Beth, Keir Starmer was confronted with the brutal reality of the war with Russia as he met victims at Ukraine's main burns unit in Kyiv. Alongside President Zelensky, he laid flowers at a makeshift memorial in the capital as they walked behind an honour guard carrying wreaths in the two countries' national colours. The leaders then got down to business, holding a round of bilateral talks at the palace before signing what they're calling a 100-year friendship deal. And in what Keir Starmer called a reminder of Russia's unrelenting aggression, a drone attack struck the Ukrainian capital during the PM's visit. Well, let's hear that interview, shall we? A broadcast exclusive with the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, we're here in Ukraine, and while meeting with President Zelensky today at his palace, the presidential palace, there was a Russian drone hovering overhead. It was shot out of the sky while you were having your meetings. What did President Zelensky say to you about it afterwards?
Well, I think for both of us, but for everybody who experienced it, you get a real sense of what the Ukrainian people are facing every single day. That wasn't a one-off incident. Their resolve is incredible. Whatever the challenge, they have this determination to get through it, this real sense of national pride, civilian pride. I saw the same. We went to the hospital this morning and saw those that had come back from the front line with terrible burns. One of them was a 60-degree burn. It was hard to see. And I spoke to those patients, and their resolve was incredible, as was the staff in the hospital. So, I mean, for us, of course, you know, that's the first time we've experienced that, but for Ukrainians, that's everyday life.
It's pretty audacious, though, isn't it, of Russia to do that while you're there?
Well, look, it's an example of the fact that Russia knows no limits here. This aggression is unrelenting, and Ukraine is paying a very heavy price on a daily basis.
And you're here to talk about what happens next. You've said Britain must put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so they can secure a just and lasting peace. Could that peace involve British troops being deployed as part of a peacekeeping force?
I've said Ukraine must be in the strongest possible position, whatever happens next. And it's really important that we don't let up on this, because we don't know what's going to happen next. I do know the Ukrainians want peace.
Well, we know that President Trump wants a peace deal. He said he wants a deal within 100 days.
Whether it's peace, whether it's continued fighting, Ukraine must be in the strongest position. And that's why I've been really clear with my message on this. We must be clear the strongest possible position. That can't be words.
But it has shifted. There is a new reality. Your language has shifted. We're now, instead of talking about open-ended war, allies are now talking about negotiations, and Trump's team are talking about a deal within 100 days. Things have changed.
Well, yes, of course, there are lots of discussions going on about what might happen next. And that has to be led by President Zelensky, and that's why it's important for me to be here having my 7th meeting with him to have that discussion. So you're right in that sense. But I do have a concern that we can't simply assume something's going to happen in 50 days, 100 days, whatever it may be, and somehow let up on this absolute requirement for Ukraine to be in the strongest position. Because whether you're negotiating or whether you're continuing to fight, being in the strongest possible position is really important. And today was about not the words, it was about the action, which is why we saw some of the joint capability.
Showing solidarity and unity and the symbolism of that. But in the substance of it, would you be prepared to deploy troops for peacekeeping? This is an open discussion amongst allies. Macron's talking about it. You met him last week. Just in principle, would you agree to do that?
Well,
in principle,
I've been discussing this with a number of allies, including, of course, President Macron, including President Zelensky here today, and we will play our full part. We have always been one of the leading countries in relation to the defence of Ukraine, and so you can read into that that we will be playing our full part. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, because this has to be enduring, it has to be lasting, it needs to be sufficient to deter further aggression. So you're prepared to do it,
but you're prepared to do that?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I do and have indicated that we will play our full part, because this isn't just about sovereignty in Ukraine, although of course it's about that. It's about what the impact is back in the United Kingdom and our values, our freedom, our democracy. Because if Russia succeeds in this aggression, it will impact all of us for a very, very long time.
And what would you say to British people that might be listening to this viewers back home that think, we don't want to get dragged into this, we don't want our troops to get dragged into any peacekeeping, we don't want to get dragged into any sort of more direct conflict or engagement with Russia? What would you say?
Well, I understand that. We are, of course, fully committed to NATO, and we're already deploying troops on a number of frontiers, as you know. And we're doing that because that impacts on our safety and security. And so for me, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the number one priority is the safety and security of everybody in the United Kingdom. But that safety and security starts on this front line here in Ukraine. But also, I would also say this, the conflict in Ukraine has had a huge implication back at home in terms of prices, in terms of the cost of living crisis, and therefore this isn't something remote, it's every day back in the United
President
Kingdom.
Zelensky said today the US, Hungary, Slovakia, Germany, he could not see Ukraine in NATO. That is quite a big shift in position. I haven't heard him say that before. Why is he saying that?
Well, NATO had a summit back in the July of last year and agreed an irreversible path for Ukraine into NATO membership, and that's the right course. I think President Zelensky is, frustrated. He'll speak for himself in relation to the progress. But what I think is
it's not going to happen in the foreseeable, is it? Because Trump's not keen. That's the reality,
look,
right?
We've agreed an irreversible path, but we have also got to be absolutely clear-eyed about the need for any security presence to be effective in its deterrence of Putin, because the worst thing could happen here is a cessation of hostilities without that deterrence, only for Putin in a year or two or three to come again, and we cannot allow that to happen.
Marco Rubio said, the US incoming Secretary of State, that there's going to have to be bold diplomacy, and it's important everyone's realistic. There will have to be concessions made by the Russian Federation, but also by the Ukrainians. Is that Zelensky's concession, acknowledging that the NATO membership is kind of parked for now? Is that what you talked about? Well,
I'm not going to disclose everything that we talked about. And I think it is really important to be clear. We aren't at that stage, and that's why there's a conflict going on, there's a war going on. Every day it's a heavy price for Ukrainians, and we have a duty, which is why we were talking. Today was symbolic, as you rightly say. It was important to have the visit, but also we discussed capabilities. We discussed training, we discussed drones, we discussed the industrial work we'll do together on defence, because for me, politics is about action, not performance. And if we say we're going to put Ukraine in the strongest position, we have to follow that up with our actions.
Prime Minister, when it comes to Trump, his election is completely changing the terms of trade. The shift from fighting in Ukraine to discussions about negotiations, the rush to a ceasefire in Gaza, criticism from NATO, threat of 20% tariffs, ambivalence now over the Chagos deal, which you've pressed pause on. He's completely changed the terms of trade, hasn't he?
Well,
This is a new reality, right?
we haven't got to the inauguration yet, but yes, of course, there are changes. There's going to be a change of administration. I had the chance to discuss that with President-elect Trump back in September when I spent a couple of hours over dinner with him, spoke to him again before Christmas on the telephone. In that call, we discussed the situation in Ukraine, and our teams are discussing all the time.
I'm talking
because
about a bigger point, which is he's changing the rules of the game. He's upending the status quo. He is, isn't he? You're going to have to adapt to a new reality under Trump.
Well, I think if it comes to Ukraine, we're working with the US on a daily basis, and we will continue to do so. We both envisage that, and that's clear from my conversations with President-elect Trump. We should pay tribute to the US for their role here and their future role here. In relation to the ceasefire in Gaza, that's something that is long overdue. We've been calling for a very, very long time.
And rushed through just before Trump takes power.
You know, these negotiations have been going on for a very long time. I'm, you know, very pleased that progress has been made, and I hope that we can go through the phases, or the proposed phases of the ceasefire, because this is hugely important for the hostages, hugely important for Palestinians who've suffered so much.
And on the Chagos deal, you had agreed that with President Biden. Now it's on hold. Why?
Well, the most important thing about the Chagos deal is to say the legality of the base was in doubt, and that's why it was important that we secured it, because that is a vital base.
But President Trump wants you to look again, or he wants to have a look at it.
Of course, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing, and it's basically agreed. But in the end, I mean, with the Chagos deal, it's really important not to lose sight of why it matters. This is a vital, vital base.
And also, you don't want to get into a row with him before he's even in office, right?
No, I mean, look, this isn't about a particular president. That base is vital for the UK, absolutely vital for the US. The long-term future was put in doubt legally. I'm glad that we've got an agreement to secure that base, because in the end, that's the thing that matters most. That's the national interest that we have at stake here.
I need to ask you one other thing about Trump, because in the theme of everything being upended, Musk, I know you don't want to comment directly on him personally, I'm not going to ask you that, but he isn't just a tech billionaire and an owner of a massive social media platform. He's also an official in the Trump administration, and he's interfering in the UK's domestic affairs. Now, normally, in all circumstances, that breaks diplomatic protocols. It hurts the relationship. Don't you have to raise it with Donald Trump?
Well, look, I take every challenge as it comes, Beth. And I've got, and I hope I've established, a good relationship with President Trump. We built that relationship when we had dinner together. There was a good rapport between us. He was very keen to turn off the lights and show me New York, and it was fantastic for him to do that. I've subsequently spoken to him. So, as you'd expect, as with my domestic politics, I ground it in the reality. I ground it in actions and making progress. And I'm pleased that we've had constructive exchanges. We'll continue to do so.
Final question. What's Trump's greatest strength?
Well, he's come back quite remarkably in American politics.
The ultimate survivor.
Well, resilience, and I mean, this is an incredible political comeback. I think that nobody could say other than that. On a personal level, I'm pleased that before the result, I was able to begin to build what will be an important personal relationship between us. We got on well, it was constructive. And it's been my business to make it constructive, because that's the right thing for our two countries, and I'll continue to do so.
And just what's his weakness?
Well, I'm not going to start having a discussion like that in an interview like this.
Well, following that interview, Beth gave us her take on what the Prime Minister had told her.
Well, it's the first time the Prime Minister's been to Kyiv, and we'd had a pretty significant interview there, because talk is swirling amongst allies now about peace negotiations, a ceasefire deal. This is what President Trump has explicitly said he wants, and allies are talking about what role they might play. And in that interview, the Prime Minister all but confirmed that the UK will play a role in these peacekeeping forces that are being discussed to monitor the border between Ukraine and Russia. He said clearly in that interview, when I asked him a number of times, that the UK will play its full part. When I said to him, what's your message to viewers back home, to people worrying about engaging or risking Russian aggression directed at us, he said that the British public need to understand that the threat to our security starts on this border, and that it's really important for the UK and other European allies to contain and see off the threat of a Russian aggressor. So I think that is really significant. The Prime Minister there all but confirming that there could be troops, UK troops deployed to the Ukraine in the coming months, although he stressed that they are some way off that. Trump has yet to be inaugurated, but all of this so significant just 5 days before the inauguration. And also I asked him about Zelensky's remarks at the press conference, saying that he did not think the US wanted to see Ukraine in NATO. He told me, well, President Zelensky has to speak for himself, but it's a reflection of Zelensky's frustration, in the words of the Prime Minister. I then moved on to talk more broadly about what a Trump administration means, as all of Europe and its allies are waking up to a new reality as Trump upends the status quo on so many fronts, be it trade tariffs, be it the Chagos Islands deal that's now put on pause, or be it NATO, what happens there. So many things that are changing, and the Prime Minister did acknowledge that there was a new reality, that things would change. But then he also spoke quite warmly, actually, about his relationship with Trump. It's a Prime Minister that really wants to swerve the difficult questions when it comes to the special relationship, and basically try and build strong diplomatic ties with Trump, because he needs it. He doesn't need a trade war with the US when his economy's already very weak. He wants the US to support Ukraine, and he definitely doesn't want to go toe-to-toe with Trump on the matter of Trump's friend, Elon Musk.
Beth Rigby there. Well, let's get some more expert analysis, shall we, to that interview. Joining us from Kyiv is our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, and from Washington, our US correspondent, Mark Stone. Deborah, to you first. Are we seeing a shift in emphasis when it comes to the Ukraine war? Are people starting to look at an off-ramp?
Very much so. You've had the Prime Minister for a number of months now talking about negotiations, whereas his predecessors were very much focused on sticking with Ukraine for as long as it takes, and that is still the language the Prime Minister uses, but for as long as it takes until Russia is defeated and Ukraine has to win. That language of win and defeat is no longer really part of the sort of dialogue at the moment. It's all about what the next stage is going to be, and there have been talks behind the scenes for over a year now about this idea of some kind of security force that could maybe involve French, maybe British, maybe other NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine, to not in the conventional peacekeeping sense, because obviously, for example, UN peacekeeping forces, they have to be neutral. It wouldn't be a neutral force. The UK, France and others very much aligned with Ukraine, but some kind of force that would be able to provide the security guarantees that Ukraine needs in order to even contemplate accepting Russian troops holding on to territory, however temporarily the Ukrainians will say that is. And then, of course, you've got the Russian side. What is going to make Vladimir Putin come to the negotiating table? Does Donald Trump have that pulling power, given that we've been in the east for the last couple of days and troops there talking about how Russian forces are still very much on the offensive, grinding forwards. They have the advantage of mass. Ukraine short of manpower, short of weapons, needing its friends, and now moving into this new stage of real uncertainty with Donald Trump in the White House from next week. And one final point, though, when it comes to UK support for Ukraine, the Prime Minister here, for his first trip since he took office, coming with lots of warm words, lots of strong language about the need to take action, not just talk. But when it comes to his own record on defence, people are asking questions as to whether or not he really is credible. He has yet to even say when the UK is going to increase its defence spending, for example, to 2.5% of national income, at a time when the incoming US president is saying NATO allies should be spending double that threshold. So real questions for the Prime Minister as to whether he really can make any meaningful offering to some kind of security force on the ground, given that his own army is undermanned, under-equipped, and very much in need of additional investment.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Let's bring in Mark Stone, shall we? I mean, Deborah was just talking there about the looming inauguration of Donald Trump next week, and I guess the UK are trying to grapple with what it means for them as well. Interesting to see Keir Starmer talking about his relationship with Donald Trump.
Yeah, an intriguing interview, honestly. And I just think it is fascinating to watch how world leaders, and Keir Starmer is by no means alone, having to tread so carefully, choose their words so carefully, because they know that they cannot upset Donald Trump. If during the first presidency of Trump, between 16 and 20, people thought that he was an anomaly and that they could be more frank with him. They know now that they can't. He is more powerful now. He has he knows the mistakes that he made. He is more clear-eyed about his vision for America and for the world, and he's all powerful. And it's just listening to the subtext of what Keir Starmer was saying to Beth there. It was so clear that he was having to be so careful with every word. And I do think that Peter Mandelson, the incoming UK ambassador to Washington, who will take over next month in February, what a difficult job he has got to try and maintain that special relationship, which, you know, it's the bedrock of the UK-US relationship. It goes back to the Second World War, to Churchill, and it has always been something that would never change. But with Trump, because of his unpredictability, everyone just wonders, you know, how quickly could he turn on Britain because of something someone said. And it's also true that the British embassy here, who for many, many months, years, in fact, a couple of years, have been working as hard as they can to penetrate Team Trump, to be on good terms with them, because they expected, as many of us did, that Trump was likely to win. They were caught off guard. They were blindsided, honestly, by the fact that Elon Musk suddenly has it in, apparently, for Keir Starmer, and he was making all these claims, all these allegations against Keir Starmer, and just kind of having a dig at him the whole time. Blindsided because they did not expect that, and of course they did not expect that Elon Musk would be effectively the co-president, as he seems to be at the moment. So there's a difficult task ahead. Many countries around the world treading very carefully. I'm reminded of that scene in Love Actually that we probably all of us couldn't have avoided over Christmas, where the character played by Hugh Grant stands up to the American president at that news conference in Downing Street. There's no way that any world leader right now is going to stand up to the current US president.
I love that little admission that you've been watching Love Actually over Christmas there, Mark. Enjoyed that one. Mark Stone, Deborah Haynes, thank you very much indeed. Well, from Ukraine to the Middle East, international diplomacy is sure to feature heavily in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Conservative Home's Deputy Editor, Henry Hill, and the New Statesman's Associate Political Editor, Rachel Cunliffe. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Is the Gaza ceasefire deal on the brink of collapse? We'll get the latest from Yalda Hakim in Doha.
What's it like doing this kind of stuff when he's not here?
Yeah, I miss him. He just inspired me to be a better person. He's shown us what living looks like in the toughest and most difficult of circumstances.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. It isn't what politicians see from election battle buses, but what ordinary people see from the buses that shape the timetable of their lives.
I feel like there's no trust between the people and the politicians.
Labour's going to get in definitely, and they're no better than the Conservatives.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Cartels in Mexico are flooding America with the drug. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Sky News, the full story first. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Very good morning to you all.
Morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
If I'm honest, I hate them. They're just evil. They'll always be monsters.
Free wherever you get your news. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
God forbid we should have to do this again.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Hello, welcome back. Well, lots to discuss the situation in Ukraine, but of course a wider geopolitical issue that we've seen is that ceasefire deal getting over the line between Israel and Hamas. But lots of questions about whether it's going to be signed off. We can talk now to Lord Ricketts, the former UK National Security Advisor who joins us in the studio. Great to have you with us. How optimistic are you that firstly the ceasefire deal will get fully signed off, will get over the line, and secondly, that it will prove lasting?
I mean, it's a precious moment of opportunity. Of course, we all want it to work for the hostages and their families, for the suffering people of Gaza. But my goodness, it's fragile and very, very difficult. We've seen even today the difficulty of getting it over the line with the Israeli cabinet. I think probably the first phase of it will work. That seems to have been pretty fully negotiated between the two sides. Which will allow some hostages to be released and some Palestinian prisoners get the humanitarian aid flowing in. But beyond that, I'm more sceptical because the second phase, it's not really even negotiated yet. And there are some massive issues there which haven't really been faced.
I mean, it feels to me that this, so often with conflicts, there's just no thought given to what happens next, like the political solution. There doesn't seem to be much talk about who could be running Palestine, who could be in charge, any talk of moving towards a two-state solution, even if that's something that Israel would agree with. It feels difficult, doesn't it?
I think that's exactly right. For example, I don't think it's yet agreed that Israeli forces will pull out of the whole of Gaza in phase 2. Who is going to maintain law and order? Because the humanitarian community say we've got the aid, but it's being looted by gangs at the moment. So if Israeli forces pull back and there's no law and order there, then there won't be humanitarian support. And then there is this massive issue of reconstruction. Hundreds of billions of dollars are going to have to be found. It'll have to come from the wealthy Gulf Arab countries, I think. But they will expect some kind of commitment to a Palestinian state at the end of the process. So all these big, difficult issues that have been there for decades, they have not been eased at all by this war. Let's hope that at least the humanitarian situation can be improved. But I must say, I think there's an awful lot of risk that it could not go beyond the first phase.
Can I ask you about the role of Donald Trump? Because obviously Joe Biden is saying, look, this is my deal, I designed it, But surely the fact that it's been signed off literally just before Donald Trump enters the White House, I mean, that can't be a coincidence.
No, I mean, I think both things are true. I think the hard yards have been done by Joe Biden, particularly Antony Blinken. This deal was basically cooked by May last year. But what Trump has done is he's pushed Netanyahu over the line. And I think the unpredictability of Trump, I don't think Netanyahu wanted to risk it. So he did the final push to get him at least into phase one. So in a way, both can take some credit for that.
It's interesting with Donald Trump, as you say, people don't want to risk it, the kind of unpredictability of it. I mean, are we seeing that in Ukraine as well, do you think?
Yes, I think we are. I think the very fact that he is so unpredictable is a new factor that people have to factor in. It's interesting that he stopped talking about solving the Ukraine problem on day one, which he used to say. I think as he gets closer to actually being in the White House, he's having to take that more seriously. But as you were hearing in your interview with Keir Starmer, I think Western leaders have got a real role to play to convince him that if he wants to end this war but also look strong, he's got to do it in a way that is with Zelensky, not done to Zelensky, and preserves Ukraine's right to decide its own security future.
How do you think Keir Starmer's going to get on with Donald Trump?
Well, politicians are pragmatists, and I think the fact that they're both in office, both relatively recently elected, they'll make it work. I think at the end of the day, they are both perfectly capable of having a working relationship. The issues are too big and too important for the personnel things to get in the way.
Just as we've been talking, we've had a little bit of breaking news coming in from Israel that I will get you to respond to, if that's OK. So as we've been speaking, the Israeli National Security Minister, Ben Gvir, has just said in a press conference that he will resign from the government if the Gaza ceasefire deal is approved. So that coming in from the press conference now. I mean, is that a surprise? Is it a problem?
It's not a surprise, I don't think. I mean, this has been a divisive issue in the Israeli cabinet ever since the start of the war. There have been two, particularly the far-right ministers in Netanyahu's cabinet who have been threatening to do that. That's been part of the reason, I think, why Netanyahu has not done a deal up to this point. So it's a price he has to pay to get the deal over the line. But I think if he's prepared to go with it in the way he has, it means he's factored that in. And he thinks that his government can survive without these two ministers.
So he can get away with a couple of resignations?
I think they were inevitable, given the very, very radical stance that the two have taken on the war in Gaza.
Yeah, it is. I guess it does show the difficulty, the kind of political situation in Israel of getting to any kind of peace deal as well.
It's very, very divisive, definitely.
How do you think... I mean, I guess there's not much that we can really do from the UK standpoint to kind of get the ceasefire locked in or to do our bit. Do you think there's much that we can really get to there?
I think we can play a real role in thinking about the next stage, the humanitarian work. There's an enormous amount of humanitarian work to do. Britain has a good record in that. We have a lot of very able people. I think we should be part of that. And I think also getting the sides to think about these longer-term issues, law and order, security, reconstruction. How can we build from this ceasefire, hoping it holds, to a lasting settlement that allows people to live in peace and stability together? That's been the challenge for decades, and the British have got a lot of experience, and I think we can be playing our part in that.
And I know I'm skipping around the world with you, but that's what I always will do if you're in this seat, because I do value your kind of expertise on this. But you were talking there about the role that Britain can play in the future in the Middle East. What is the kind of role that we can play in Ukraine? We obviously heard Beth Rigby there asking Keir Starmer about that.
Well, I think we've played a very distinguished role since the start of the Ukraine war. We've been probably the leading European country in supporting Ukraine militarily and economically. And Keir Starmer's been in Kyiv signing this 100-year partnership. 100-year partnership, that's quite an undertaking for a government. But it shows the commitment in the long term to support Ukraine. I do not think that Keir Starmer was talking about British peacekeeping forces. Beth was putting that to him. Peacekeeping forces, I mean, that's a very, very demanding thing to ask of a country. Putting your forces between the Russians and the Ukrainians, potentially willing to fight to keep them apart. That's not the role I think that British forces would play. I could see perhaps that the UK would deploy some forces in a training role, for example, to have some people actually in Ukraine, but not at risk of being drawn into fighting. All that's to be said for the future. I think the key thing now is that the UK can play a leadership role, thought leadership, in how to bring Putin and Zelensky to the table. We are going to have a negotiation, I think, in the course of this year. The Trump effect can be useful there, but it's got to preserve Ukraine's independence. It's got to make sure that they don't have the territory they're occupying as their own sovereign territory.
Just finally, because it feels like this is a thorny problem here. You know, Ukraine say, OK, well, what's going to stop Russia invading again? How can we have protection? Russia say, if Ukraine join NATO, if we get peacekeeping forces that are countries of NATO near our border, that's a provocation. So how do these things become squared?
Well, Keir Starmer and others have been talking about peace through strength, and I think that means reinforcing the Ukrainian armed forces, making sure they've got the capacity to stand on their own feet, and at least starting the process of bringing them towards NATO. I don't think they're going to join NATO anytime soon, but at least saying that they have the right to be members of NATO and working more and more closely. After all, they're the most battle-hardened force in Europe. NATO can learn a lot from them. So we can try and make them as spiny a hedgehog as possible to make sure that Russia doesn't want to go and try and eat them. I think that's the best we can do from the outside.
Yeah, make sure those prickles are sharp enough.
Very sharp.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Ricketts. Great to have you on the programme this evening.
Thank you.
We're going to continue on the Middle East. Clearly a fast-moving situation still with ceasefire talks tonight. We'll have lots more on this at 9 p.m. on The World with Yalda Hakim. I'm glad to say that Yalda joins us now. Yalda, we've been talking about how fragile this deal is, whether it's going to get over the line in Israel. What's the latest you can tell us?
Yeah, Sophie, good to see you again. Well, as you say, and as you've been talking there with your guests, just how fragile, precarious this deal actually is. Even yesterday, we were talking when I was holed up at the Prime Minister's press conference, waiting for him to appear and tell us what was going on with the deal. We could tell that there were still details that hadn't been ironed out. We woke up this morning, Sophie, to find out from the Israeli Prime Minister's office that they were going to put a pause to this deal because they said that Hamas was still blackmailing them, that they were trying to torpedo what was agreed yesterday. Hamas told Sky News that that was not the case, that they were sticking to the agreement that was made yesterday. And just in the last few minutes, another dramatic development. The far-right minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, now he's the national security minister. He has boasted in the last 24 hours that he has torpedoed himself. He's, put spanners in the work to try and derail these peace talks over the course of the last year or so. He's now given a press conference in the past few minutes saying that if this deal goes ahead, he will resign. And now the Security Cabinet is due to meet tomorrow to ratify this deal. The government will meet on Saturday after Shabbat to push this deal through, and then hostages will likely be released over the coming days after that point. But this deal is expected to get into effect on Sunday if all of that actually goes through. Now, Itamar Ben-Gvir on the far right, as I said, is not part of the Security Cabinet, but he's sending a very clever and clear message to other far-right ministers. He is urging them essentially to defect because he's saying, and I'll just read you a little bit of what he said at that press conference. He said, "I say to Benjamin Netanyahu, don't be afraid or intimidated. You will get every safety net you need to make the hostage deal. This is more important than any disagreement we've ever had." He's basically saying that you are capitulating to Hamas, that Hamas has not been destroyed as promised. Now, over the course of the last year, Sophie, every time I've spoken to Israeli officials, they have maintained that victory to them means that Hamas will be eradicated and destroyed. That hasn't happened, and they have been forced to the negotiating table partially by the Biden administration and pushed over the line, as we've been discussing, by Trump administration officials. And Trump himself described it as an epic deal. So Donald Trump wants to, on Monday, when the inauguration takes place in Washington, D.C., he wants to stand there and say, look what I did. I fulfilled my promise. I brought an end to the hostilities. But there is a long road ahead, and we'll have to wait and see what far-right ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir do next, because right now we're seeing the divisions within Israel. It's not the hostilities that they have with Hamas at this point in time. The Americans say that they are happy that this agreement has taken place. The Qataris, essential to this deal, are pleased. And in fact, the Qatari Prime Minister went off to Syria today. That's how, comfortable he was with where things were at. We are now seeing the infighting, the tensions within the Israeli government.
Yalda, thank you very much indeed. Yalda Hakim there for us from Doha. And of course, you can see the World with Yalda Hakim, 9 p.m, for more coverage of this. Back to the UK now, because the past week has seen growing pressure on the government to take further action on the grooming gangs scandal, and not just from opposition parties. Here's what Labour MP for Rotherham, Sarah Champion, told me early this week about what she wanted the Home Office to do.
What I'm calling for is for the Home Office to start an inquiry, but to give the responsibility for delivering that down to a local level. So in practice, what that would be is you would have an independent chair, and then the community and the victims and survivors would shape what their inquiry looked like, depending on what they needed locally. But the key thing is it would be mandated to call people in and demand that they give evidence. I've been liaising really closely with the Home Office. I mean, in many ways, we're sort of on the same path, but it's a lot easier for me to call for things without having to actually deal with the logistics and administration that lie behind it. So I'm sensitive to why they're lagging behind. But what I'm trying to do is get the whole of Parliament to come together as one.
Well, today, the Home Secretary set out to MPs a multi-million-pound plan for a series of local inquiries into grooming gangs. Yvette Cooper also told the Commons Baroness Louise Casey will see a rapid audit of the current scale of exploitation across the country.
So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas. That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels or drawing on the experience of the Independent Inquiry Truth Project.
Well, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, said in a speech today she didn't think local inquiries are enough. But the main purpose of that speech was a plan to restore the public's trust in her party. We'll hear from the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, in a moment. But first, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here. Sam, you were at that speech. You asked a question afterwards. What did you make of it? Did it go as she wanted?
I think it did. The purpose of Kemi Badenoch's speech today was to say, look, we know that we, in the last Conservative government, got a lot of things wrong. We know that there are a lot of problems with Britain. It was essentially to provide something of a clean break with the past. Now, that required her to deliver some quite difficult messages. And without naming them, she was essentially taking aim at a whole succession of previous Conservative prime ministers and ministers who got basically, she says, the country in the wrong place, whether it was on Brexit, whether it was on immigration. There's something admirable, I think, about Kemi Badenoch and incredibly ambitious. What she was doing, she was going through and listing all the really big fundamental challenges that any leader, any party face. National officials, local officials, politicians of all stripes, the sort of challenges on the economy. Of course, she didn't spare the Labour Party. She said there was economic vandalism in the last budget and took aim at some of the decisions that they'd made and criticised them, as you were just saying, about grooming gangs. But was painting this picture of almost a sort of broken state. But there's a challenge. And the challenge is, I think, Sophie, that there was a lot of diagnosis, but not necessarily an answer. So listen to this. This is the question I asked her and the response that she gave. Kemi Badenoch, listening closely to your speech, I'm just wondering whether there's a danger that it's all just a bit, well, depressing, because you gave a long list of things that you think are intractable problems and a long list of things that you're against, you know, Tory politicians, Labour politicians, national officials, local bureaucrats, parliamentarians, all sorts of policy failures. You haven't given much sense of a solution. You're quite upfront about that, but isn't this an issue? And also, isn't it all just a bit joyless, which in political terms is a problem because it's a contrast to Nigel Farage?
So I think that this is a great question. And I'm speaking based on where the Conservative Party is. We have just suffered our greatest ever defeat, ever, in hundreds of years. I don't think the public will start trusting us if I turn up looking like I'm having a great time and everything is fantastic. I want them to know that we understand why they asked for change, why they voted pretty much every party they could do in order to kick us out. So I'm doing a serious job here. I'm talking about new leadership, and I want them to know that things are different and we are going to be earning their trust. But I did say some positive things. I talked about the next generation. Intergenerational unfairness is something that I really care about. We've got to give young people hope and optimism. We've got to give them sunlit uplands. And I will do that. Nigel Farage has been knocking around for 20 plus years. He's been leading all sorts of different parties. So he's had a head start. I've been leading the Conservative Party for 10 weeks. Let's see where we are in a few months, in a few years.
So having set herself the most difficult kind of essay question, I just wonder, Sophie, whether she's got the time that she thinks she has to actually come up with an answer. Look, in the Sky poll by YouGov earlier this week, Reform came second, the Tories came third. The conversation in the Tory party might turn out to be, do we have to cooperate with Reform? If a local elections this year, next year go bad, is that going to be the conversation? Has Kemi Badenoch really got the time that she thinks to offer those difficult solutions to the difficult questions she's posing? I think that's the dilemma she faces.
It's really interesting. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, I did speak about some of those issues in an interview I did just before coming on air with the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. So today, the government's announced a multi-million-pound plan for local inquiries into grooming gangs. What's your response to the announcement?
Well, I'm afraid to say it is totally inadequate. The government's announcement today only covers 5 towns, and yet we know something like 40 or maybe even 50 towns are affected. So this will barely scratch the surface. That's the first problem. The second problem is these inquiries, it became clear in Parliament today, won't have statutory powers. That means they won't have the legal power to compel witnesses to attend, to take evidence under oath, or to requisition evidence to force public bodies to give up written evidence. And that is a real problem because the local inquiry in Manchester saw its chairs last year resign because public bodies were still, even as recently as last year, withholding evidence, and that Manchester local inquiry didn't have the power, the legal power, to make them disclose the information, and so the chairs resigned. So only 5 towns covered, no legal powers. It's just not good enough.
I guess the question I have is, and I understand you have concerns about this, but, you know, the Telford inquiry model worked pretty well. You know, some of your colleagues, like the Conservative Robbie Moore, for example, was calling for a Telford squad-style inquiry last year. 47 recommendations, 38 fully implemented. If you compare that to the public inquiry, which took 7 years, you've criticised it. You had a string of chairs having to resign before they landed on Alexis J. None of the recommendations implemented. You know, it's not like a magic bullet, is it?
Well, 2 things. Firstly, the Telford inquiry, I think, had like 8 times more funding than is being proposed for these new local inquiries. That's the first thing. And secondly, there are some local council areas, I think Bradford is one, where there have been really serious problems in the past, but those councils themselves don't want to have an inquiry. They're, in my view, perpetuating the cover-up. And so they're going to be potentially completely missed out. Look, we need the whole country to be covered. This is a national scandal. This scandal was covered up for many, many years. We need to get to the truth. We need to cover the whole country, not just 5 towns, and we need the legal powers to force these public bodies to tell the truth and give up the information that they hold. And as I say, as recently as last year, the Manchester local inquiry found they couldn't get the information they needed.
I totally understand the depth of feeling and concern on this. You know, it's like a scar on the UK. In some ways, it's more of an open wound because there's no evidence that, you know, this kind of behaviour hasn't stopped, that's not still going on now. Is there a risk that you're undermining faith in this inquiry, in this solution? Because, look, I get that you've got concerns, it's not exactly what you would do, but is there an argument that now is a time for politicians to come together and just try and get something done?
Well, look, I think we have to do the best by victims and we have to make sure the truth comes out. I think what will undermine public trust and confidence is if there's any sense that this is not being properly investigated. And by only looking at 5 towns when 40 or 50
well, there
are
is
affected...
also, they're looking at a review as well, aren't they? Right?
But hang on, but that's just a 3-month, what do they call it, an audit.
Because they want to get stuff done quickly.
Well, jammed in before Louise Casey goes on to look at social care. That is absolutely not going to get to the bottom of this, and that won't have any legal powers either. We need a full national public inquiry. Labour MPs, like Sarah Champion, the very courageous MP for Rotherham has said that. The Labour MP, Dan from Liverpool Wavertree, Walton, has said that. Even
Sarah Champion has welcomed it. She's quite happy with some of it.
Yeah, but she's also clear that she wants more to be done, rightly, and she called for a full public national inquiry just a few days ago. Andy Burnham, the Labour Mayor of Manchester, has said that. But so have victims. Victims want a full national public inquiry so the truth can come out and then the public can have confidence. We know what really happened. We can make sure the perpetrators are jailed, where they can be deported. They should all be deported. And public officials, whether it's in the police, local councils or the CPS, who either ignored this or covered it up, in my view, should be prosecuted for the common law offence of misconduct in public office. Then we can be confident the truth is out and this will never happen again.
I guess the kind of obvious retort in interviews like this is, why didn't you guys do anything about it when you were in power? Which I guess leads me to Kemi Badenoch's speech today, where it felt like almost like a big apology for all the things that you guys got wrong, whether it's immigration, the handling of Brexit, net zero. Do you want to apologise for some of the mistakes that you made?
Well, I think she openly acknowledged the mistakes today in a number of areas. I mean, immigration was far too high. Now, we took some measures late in our time in office to reduce it, but that was, frankly, too little too late.
Would an apology be appropriate for the things you got wrong?
I think she was very, very open and honest in saying that mistakes were made in that area by committing to net zero very, very soon. Right, that was risk bills going up too quickly. The state was probably too big. So I think she was very honest about those mistakes. And
it's quite gloomy, isn't it? Where are the solutions? You go into these political speeches expecting, a bit of optimism, a bit of change, a hope. Instead, you're just going through all the things that you did wrong.
I think first of all, if you're trying to stage a recovery, the first thing to do is to be honest, and she was very honest today. The next phase, having been honest, is to develop proper plans to fix these issues. Now, it's very easy just to have kind of simple slogans. And, we saw that from Labour at the last election. We see it from some other political parties. Now, what we're not going to do is come up with sort of cheap and easy slogans. We're going to develop proper plans, credible plans, that the public can have confidence in, the media can scrutinise to fix some of these issues. Now, that's not an overnight fix. So developing plans to deal with some of these issues is not the work of a week or a month. We're going to do it properly, come up with real plans, and then present them to the public, take scrutiny from the media, and then the public at the next election will know we've got a plan for fixing these issues.
I just can't help feeling that might have been all right in the old politics, but now, do you have that time? Often after a defeat like the one you suffered, it's normal to go away, to recalibrate, to think, to lick your wounds, to work out what went wrong. But Reform are chomping at your heels right now. You've got another party who are entering that vacuum. Is there a risk that you're just being too slow? You're leaving the space for Reform to become the party of the right?
Well, of course, they have some eye-catching slogans, but I don't think, have or will develop those detailed plans that are needed to actually fix these very difficult problems. And we are going to do that. So come the next election, the public can have confidence that we've actually thought about this properly and have plans that will work in practice.
Still to come on the Politics Hub, Labour could face a tricky by-election test after the suspended MP Mike Amesbury pleaded guilty to assault. More on that next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, after weeks of pressure over grooming gangs, the Home Secretary announces a new series of local inquiries. We'll get reaction from the Survivors Trust. Plus, the growing calls for parents to be given paid bereavement leave after a miscarriage. We'll be hearing from the broadcaster Mylene Klass about the huge difference this would make for grieving women and their partners. And we'll be joined by a woman scammed out of thousands of pounds by a girlfriend who turned out to be an AI deep fake. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing. A towering monument to the China dream and its demise. From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart. China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world. Mass protests forced the president to flee. The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again.
This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under.
Sky News, the full story first. that may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
The Premier League is on NBC and Peacock. It's a clash in the capital. Arsenal. Aston Villa. Saturday on NBC and Peacock.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the government faces the prospect of a tricky by-election test after this man, the former Labour MP Mike Amesbury, pleaded guilty to assault. Well, our chief political correspondent John Craig is here. It could be quite a difficult by-election as well.
Reform in second place in that seat at the last election. So, Mr Amesbury, who had been an opposition spokesman but didn't get a government job, the government will be relieved about that probably now. It's the seat of Runcorn and Helsby. That is on the way up to Liverpool. You go through Runcorn on the train to party conferences at Liverpool. Majority, 14,696. He was previously MP for a seat called Weaver Vale. But Reform was second. Mr Amesbury had nearly 53% of the vote. Reform had 18%. Tories in third place on 16%. Now, Reform have already said today he should do the decent thing, resign, cause a by-election. Now, he's not been sentenced yet. If he gets a custodial sentence, even if it's suspended, that could probably trigger a by-election. He did say today, when he made an apology outside court, I'll have more to say at the conclusion of the case. He may quit then, of course.
And on paper, that looks like a chunky old majority, but what's happened previously in these kind of by-elections?
We saw, didn't we, in the last Parliament, that Tories lost seats where they had majorities of over 20,000. There were 23 by-elections in the last Parliament.
That by-election correspondent here, John Craig.
10 of which were the result of MPs, shall we say, some form of misconduct, everything from sex scandals to lobbying scandals. 5 MPs died, and nearly all the party got punished when an MP was guilty of some sexual impropriety or the lobbying, in the case of people like Owen Paterson and so on. Normally, when a much-loved MP dies, that helps the party hold the seat, but it didn't happen with Cheryl Gillan in Chesham and Amersham. Lib Dems won that. So, first by-election of the Parliament, almost certainly, if there's a recall petition. Labour have completely disowned him.
We're going to end there you go with John Craig's encyclopedic knowledge of by-elections. Thank you so much for being on the programme, John Craig there. Well, that is it from us tonight. We're not on air on Monday because of Donald Trump's inauguration, so I'll see you on Tuesday at 7 p.m.